This daily life is not passive. It is deeply alive. It is alert, sensitive, responsive to the inner movement rather than the outer demand. You discover that you no longer must figure out your path. The path unfolds. You no longer must chase supply. Supply appears as needed. You no longer must manage relationships. Relationships begin to harmonize themselves when you meet every person from the consciousness of one. When we hear the familiar words, "Be still and know that I am God," we often accept them merely as comforting scripture, something to remember in times of trouble. Yet we seldom pause long enough to discover that within those words lies the entire secret of spiritual life. These words are not addressed to a mortal being attempting to reach a distant deity. They are a revelation from the infinite to itself, inviting us to become aware of the presence that has never been absent. Let us enter this hour with a quiet mind and a receptive heart, for the truth we seek today is not found in the movement of thought, nor in the activity of the human mind, but in the stillness that reveals what has forever been true. Be still is the divine instruction to withdraw our dependence upon the mind, upon language, upon the outer world of forms, and to open ourselves to the presence that announces itself only when we are no longer attempting to generate spiritual experience. In this hour, we are not trying to find God, reach God, change God, or persuade God. We are simply acknowledging that the infinite invisible, the presence we call God, is the reality of our own being, and that it reveals itself when the mind grows quiet. Therefore, as we begin our study, let us not approach these words with the intention to gain something, to acquire something, or to make something happen. We must understand from the beginning that the stillness spoken of here is not the silence of a quiet room, nor is it a discipline imposed upon the human mind. It is an inner resting, an attitude of non-resistance, a release of the ceaseless attempt to think our way to God. For as long as we approach truth through thought, as long as we believe that spiritual realization can be achieved through the effort of the human intellect, we remain outside the very awareness this passage reveals. Be still is the divine instruction to withdraw our dependence upon the mind, upon language, upon the outer world of forms, and to open ourselves to the presence that announces itself only when we are no longer attempting to generate spiritual experience. When Scripture tells us, "Be still and know that I am God," it is indicating that the knowing of God takes place only when the activity of the human mind has been set aside. For the divine can be known only by the divine, and the human mind, being finite, can never encompass the infinite. We must understand from the beginning that the stillness spoken of here is not the silence of a quiet room, nor is it a discipline imposed upon the human mind. It is an inner resting, an attitude of non-resistance, a release of the ceaseless attempt to think our way to God. For as long as we approach truth through thought, as long as we believe that spiritual realization can be achieved through the effort of the human intellect, we remain outside the very awareness this passage reveals. It is a living reality, a presence that exists long before thought arises and remains long after thought has ceased. And so, when we speak of silence, we do not mean merely the absence of noise. We mean the absence of mental activity, the surrender of the belief that the mind can reach God. Be still is the divine instruction to withdraw our dependence upon the mind, upon language, upon the outer world of forms, and to open ourselves to the presence that announces itself only when we are no longer attempting to generate spiritual experience. This is the true knowing of God, not the mind's assertion, but the soul's awareness. The divine never shouts. It never argues. It never compels. The activity of God is a quiet flowing, like a river that moves without effort, like the breath that enters and leaves without command. And if we would become aware of this presence, we must enter its own nature. We cannot hear the still small voice while speaking. We cannot feel the presence while thinking. It is in the relinquishing of all attempts to reach God that the realization dawns, God is already the life I am living. This is the reason silence is essential, not as a technique or discipline, but as the atmosphere in which the infinite discloses itself. Let us, then, accept that the nature of God is silence, and that to know God is to allow that silence to permeate our being. In this way, we do not climb toward heaven. We rest in the awareness that heaven is within us, and in that resting, we receive the impartation of Spirit which does the work that thought could never accomplish. Let us now look gently and honestly at a question that has troubled spiritual seekers for centuries. Why do so many prayers go unanswered? Why do we find ourselves pleading with God, affirming truth, repeating sacred words, and yet experiencing so little change? The answer is not that God withholds, nor that God sometimes turns away and sometimes responds. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, an unchanging love, an unchanging presence, an unchanging law of harmony. The difficulty lies not in God's willingness, but in our approach. Indeed, the very nature of our praying often prevents us from receiving the impartation of Spirit. Let us, then, accept that the nature of God is silence, and that to know God is to allow that silence to permeate our being. In this way, we do not climb toward heaven. We rest in the awareness that heaven is within us, and in that resting, we receive the impartation of Spirit which does the work that thought could never accomplish. When we pray from fear, from desire, from anxiety, from a sense of lack or danger, we are praying from a state of mental agitation. We are not still, we are not receptive, we are not resting in truth, we are pleading from a belief in separation. The mind is active, reaching outward, seeking rescue, trying to bring God into the situation. But God need not come anywhere. God is already the substance of our being, already the life of us, already the intelligence functioning as our very existence. This is why ordinary prayer fails. It begins with the belief that God is somewhere else, that God must be summoned, persuaded, or convinced. It believes that if we make our case well enough, God will intervene. But such prayer only reinforces the illusion that we are separate beings trying to contact a distant deity. In that state, the mind is restless, concerned, fearful, and a restless mind cannot be the instrument through which Spirit reveals itself. You see, the mind that prays for God to act is the very mind that must become still before God can be known. As long as we are reaching outward, we cannot receive inwardly. As long as we are speaking, we cannot hear. As long as we are thinking, we cannot feel the presence. True prayer is not speaking to God. It is not asking, demanding, or declaring. True prayer is the quiet awareness of God, already present, already functioning, already fulfilling its own nature in and as our being. When Jesus said, "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask," he was revealing that all outward prayer is unnecessary movement. The divine does not require information from us. The divine does not require persuasion. Everything that God is, wisdom, harmony, life, love, supply, is already embodied within us. But we cannot feel this embodiment while the mind is filled with petition. This is why ordinary prayer fails. It begins with the belief that God is somewhere else, that God must be summoned, persuaded, or convinced. It believes that if we make our case well enough, God will intervene. But such prayer only reinforces the illusion that we are separate beings trying to contact a distant deity. In that state, the mind is restless, concerned, fearful, and a restless mind cannot be the instrument through which spirit reveals itself. This is why ordinary prayer fails. It begins with the belief that God is somewhere else, that God must be summoned, persuaded, or convinced. It believes that if we make our case well enough, God will intervene. But such prayer only reinforces the illusion that we are separate beings trying to contact a distant deity. In that state, the mind is restless, concerned, fearful, and a restless mind cannot be the instrument through which spirit reveals itself. As we move deeper into our study, let us consider more fully what it means to be still. These words are often interpreted as an instruction to quiet the body or subdue the mind, but their true significance goes far beyond physical stillness or mental discipline. Be still is a doorway into the highest form of spiritual contact, a contact not achieved through effort but revealed when all effort ceases. To be still is to relinquish our dependence on the human mind. It is to surrender the belief that the mind can solve our problems, find our good, or bring God into our experience. When we attempt to use thought to reach God, we remain in the realm of the finite, trying to touch the infinite with an instrument incapable of knowing it. But the moment we release this effort, even briefly, a new dimension opens, one in which the soul, not the mind, becomes aware of the presence that has never been absent. Spiritual contact is not an event the human self can produce. It is not the result of repeating sacred words or practicing techniques. It is the natural unfolding of divine awareness when the surface activity of the mind subsides. Just as a lake reflects the sky only when its waters are undisturbed, so the divinity within reveals itself when the mind grows quiet. We cannot force this stillness, we can only allow it. And as we allow it, something profound begins to take place. In that moment of true stillness, there is a gentle recognition, not a thought, not a belief, not a mental conclusion, but an inward knowing that God is here. The presence announces itself not with sound, not with image, but with a depth of peace that no human reasoning can produce. This is the spiritual contact that changes everything. It is not the contact of a person with a God. It is the divine consciousness recognizing its own presence as our being. This is why be still must precede and know. The knowing of God does not come through thinking, it comes through being. It arises in the silence beneath thought, in the stillness beneath desire, in the quiet place where the human self has stepped aside. In that sacred instant, the personal I dissolves, and the true I, the I that is God, reveals itself as the very life we are. This contact may last only a moment, but that moment is enough. For in that moment, something within us has touched reality, and that touch becomes the law of harmony unto our entire experience. It resolves problems, not because we have solved them, but because we have entered the atmosphere in which God alone is power, presence, and activity. So, when we speak of being still, let us remember that we are not imposing silence. We are resting in the silence that already exists. We are not creating peace. We are entering the peace that is always present. We are not making spiritual contact. We are receiving the awareness of a contact that has never been broken. Let us now look together at one of the most important principles in the entire spiritual life, the utter inability of the human mind to perform spiritual work. If we can grasp this even dimly, we will find ourselves lifted into a new dimension of practice, one in which spiritual realization flows naturally without strain or effort. But so long as we believe that the mind is capable of touching God, understanding God, or directing God, we will continue to wander in circles, achieving only moments of comfort rather than the transformative awareness that reveals harmony. The human mind is a remarkable instrument on the material plane. It can calculate, measure, analyze, invent, and organize. It can solve mechanical problems, build cities, and explore the outer universe, but with all its brilliance, it cannot know God. It cannot enter the realm of spirit, for spirit is not a thought, nor a concept, nor an emotion. Spirit is the very essence of being unconditioned, infinite, and indivisible. And the finite mind cannot grasp the infinite. Many seekers have spent years attempting to think truth, believing that if they could affirm God often enough, strongly enough, with enough sincerity, they would draw the presence into activity. But thought has no power to draw God, because God is omnipresent. There is no place from which God must be drawn. And when we attempt to use thought as a bridge to God, we are unknowingly declaring that God is absent, that God must be summoned, that God must be reached through mental activity. This misunderstanding lies at the root of so much frustration on the spiritual path. We imagine that if only we had stronger thoughts, clearer thoughts, more spiritual thoughts, more positive thoughts, we would finally contact the divine. But the infinite way teaches that thought is never the doorway to spirit. At its highest, thought can point to truth, but it cannot reveal truth. It cannot produce realization. It cannot establish spiritual contact. Why? Because thought is always dualistic. It always divides good and bad, right and wrong, truth and error, God and man. Spirit recognizes no such division. Spirit is one. Thought, by its very nature, cannot enter unity. It operates only in the realm of concepts. Therefore, the moment we turn to thought as the means of attaining God, we remove ourselves from the very atmosphere in which God reveals himself. This is why spiritual healing does not come through affirmations, nor through denials, nor through mental arguments. No matter how pure our thoughts may be, they remain thoughts, and God is not found in them. The spiritual practitioner does not direct truth toward a person or condition, nor does he attempt to mentally correct error. Instead, he becomes still, releases all mental activity, and allows the presence to announce itself. In that impartation, harmony reveals itself not because of anything he has thought or declared, but because he has set aside the mind and allowed spirit to come through. If we would truly understand the words, "Be still and know that I am God," we must accept this. The knowing of God does not occur in the mind. It occurs when the mind is silent. The mind, with all its reasoning, desiring, fearing, and reaching, is the only barrier to realization. When that activity subsides, even for a moment, the divine consciousness that has always been present shines forth in its own light. Often the healing appears outwardly in ways the human mind cannot understand. A condition that seemed chronic begins to improve. A relationship softens. A financial need is quietly met without struggle. None of this happens because the practitioner sent healing power. There is no power to send. It happens because the realized presence dissolves the illusion of a second power, an opposing condition, and harmony reveals itself as the natural state of being, for in the presence of the One, all illusion collapses of its own weight. Let us now look gently into the sacred mystery of spiritual healing. For here too the same principle governs. All healing is the revelation of God's presence, and this revelation takes place only in silence. No practitioner heals by thought. No practitioner heals by virtue of personal understanding or mental ability. All true healing is the activity of God made evident when the practitioner becomes still enough to let the presence announce itself. When someone calls upon you for help, you may feel at first the natural human impulse to correct the condition, to relieve the suffering, to restore harmony. But in that very impulse lies the temptation to turn again toward thought, toward the desire to do something, accomplish something, or bring about a change. The Infinite Way teaches that if we attempt to correct the outer picture, we remain in the realm of the picture itself. Healing never occurs in the picture. It occurs in consciousness, and consciousness reveals harmony when it is free of mental interference. Therefore, the moment a call for help comes, the practitioner does not reach for a technique, nor does he begin to declare truths or repeat familiar statements. He moves inward not to think, but to rest. He withdraws interest from the appearance, knowing that the appearance has no power, no law, no substance of its own. He does not attempt to make the condition better. He does not attempt to correct it mentally. He simply becomes still. And in that stillness, a remarkable thing begins to take place. The sense of a personal I, an individual healer with responsibility and burden, disappears. What remains is awareness, pure, open, receptive awareness. Into that awareness the presence flows not as something newly arrived, but as something newly recognized. The impartation may be so gentle that it cannot be described. It may appear as a quiet assurance, a soft inner warmth, a peace that touches the very core of the being. Sometimes it is so subtle that one becomes aware of it only in retrospect when the healing has already unfolded. This is the moment of spiritual contact, and it is always silent. No words are spoken inwardly or outwardly. No argument takes place. No denial of error is made. The activity of spirit reveals itself as the awareness of one presence, one power, one life. And in that awareness, disease loses its reality, lack loses its hold, fear dissolves. Why? Because the appearance, whatever form it took, was never a presence, never a power, never a law. It was only a belief sustained by mental activity. When the mental activity ceases, the belief has nothing upon which to rest, and so it fades. Healing does not come because we have changed something. Healing comes because we have witnessed the truth that nothing needed to be changed. God alone is, and where God is realized as the substance, life, and identity of all being, no opposite condition can stand. The presence is the principle. It performs the work. The practitioner merely rests in an inner silence that allows the truth to come through. Often the healing appears outwardly in ways the human mind cannot understand. A condition that seemed chronic begins to improve. A relationship softens. A financial need is quietly met without struggle. None of this happens because the practitioner sent healing power. There is no power to send. It happens because the realized presence dissolves the illusion of a second power, an opposing condition, and harmony reveals itself as the natural state of being. Healing does not come because we have changed something. Healing comes because we have witnessed the truth that nothing needed to be changed. God alone is, and where God is realized as the substance, life, and identity of all being, no opposite condition can stand. The presence is the principle. It performs the work. The practitioner merely rests in an inner silence that allows the truth to come through. Let us now turn toward the practical side of our work, not to introduce a method or a technique, for in the infinite way we do not rely on methods, but to offer a way of entering the atmosphere in which realization may dawn. You see, stillness cannot be achieved through force, nor can it be produced through discipline. Stillness is not something we create, it is something we allow. And so our practice is not one of effort, but of gentle recognition. Often the healing appears outwardly in ways the human mind cannot understand. A condition that seemed chronic begins to improve. A relationship softens. A financial need is quietly met without struggle. None of this happens because the practitioner sent healing power. There is no power to send. It happens because the realized presence dissolves the illusion of a second power, an opposing condition, and harmony reveals itself as the natural state of being. If thoughts arise, do not fight them, for the very act of resisting thought is itself a form of mental activity. Allow the thoughts to come and go as clouds drifting across the sky without giving them power or interest. This is the moment of spiritual contact, and it is always silent. No words are spoken inwardly or outwardly. No argument takes place. No denial of error is made. The activity of spirit reveals itself as the awareness of one presence, one power, one life. And in that awareness, disease loses its reality, lack loses its hold, fear dissolves. Why? Because the appearance, whatever form it took, was never a presence, never a power, never a law. Begin your day, if possible, by sitting quietly for a few moments, not with the intention of accomplishing something, nor of reaching God, nor of making spiritual contact. Simply sit as one who is willing to be receptive. You do not need to prepare your mind with thoughts, nor fill the silence with affirmations. Let the mind settle naturally, just as dust settles when the air grows calm. It is the activity of the presence announcing itself. After a few minutes, you may rise and begin your day. Do not evaluate the experience. Do not ask whether anything happened. Spiritual realization is not measured by sensation. Even if your mind felt busy, even if no peace seemed to come, the very act of turning within has prepared the ground for future unfoldment. Remember, unseen activity is often the most powerful. Just as a seed germinates beneath the soil long before it breaks the surface, so the activity of spirit takes place within your consciousness long before you become aware of it outwardly. Throughout the day, pause whenever you feel yourself being drawn into fear, anxiety, or the belief in two powers. Close your eyes for a brief moment, take a quiet inward breath, and simply acknowledge, God is here. Again, no repetition, no effort to make something happen, just the recognition. In that one instant of turning within, the mind steps aside, and grace finds an opening through which to reveal itself. This simple practice, repeated gently and without strain, cultivates an inner habit of receptivity. Eventually, the stillness becomes not something you enter, but something that follows you, accompanies you, surrounds you. You begin to live from a center of quiet awareness, and in that atmosphere the presence speaks, not in words, but as a continuous flow of peace, assurance, and harmony. This is the essence of spiritual practice in the infinite way, not thinking, not striving, but resting in the truth that the divine is already the life of your being. As we come to this next stage of our work, let us understand that the purpose of stillness is not confined to moments of meditation. A few minutes of quiet reflection may open the door, but it is in the unfolding of the day that the deeper fruit of realization appears. The goal is not to retire from life in order to be spiritual. It is to carry the awareness of the presence into every circumstance, until the activity of God is felt in the very midst of ordinary experience. When you begin to sense this inner stillness throughout the day, you will notice something remarkable. You no longer respond to appearances with the same urgency, fear, or excitement. The outer world begins to lose its power to disturb you because you have touched the deeper world that lies beneath it. You have discovered that harmony does not come from conditions but from consciousness, and that consciousness, resting in truth, governs the outer picture with effortless grace. As you go about your daily tasks, working, conversing, caring for your home, engaging with others, you will find opportunities to pause inwardly, even for a second, and remember, God is the only presence here. You may not say it in words. You may simply feel it, a quiet recognition, a gentle awareness, an inner loosening of the mind's grip. And in that recognition, the conditions around you begin to take on a different quality. Obstacles soften, tensions ease, solutions arise without struggle. Why? Not because you have manipulated the situation, but because your consciousness, now imbued with spiritual awareness, no longer resists the natural activity of grace. This is the secret of living from the realization of God's presence. Life becomes less a process of seeking and more a process of allowing. You do not strive to make things happen, you watch them unfold. You do not reach for supply. Supply appears as the expression of divine abundance. You do not struggle with relationships. Harmony emerges as the natural state where God is recognized as the identity of all. You do not wage war against fear or sickness. You see them for what they are, shadows that vanish in the light of realization. In this new way of living, you discover that nothing in the outer world needs to be conquered or corrected. The only work is inward to maintain, as best you can, the awareness that the presence is here and that it alone governs all activity. Some days you may feel deeply connected. Other days you may feel distracted or troubled. This is natural. Spiritual realization unfolds gradually, like dawn breaking over the horizon. Some mornings are brilliant with light. Others reveal only a faint glow. Why? Not because you have manipulated the situation, but because your consciousness, now imbued with spiritual awareness, no longer resists the natural activity of grace. As you persist gently in recognizing the presence, you begin to experience a profound shift in your sense of identity. You no longer see yourself as a struggling, thinking, planning human being. You begin to sense that life is living itself through you, that there is a divine activity moving your actions, guiding your decisions, arranging your steps. This is what the Infinite Way calls letting God govern, not by withdrawing from the world, but by entering it with a heart attuned to the one presence. And gradually, without effort, you find that the presence becomes a companion, an atmosphere, a living reality that accompanies you throughout the day. You do not have to stop and search for God. You feel God as the very ground of your being, the breath of your breath, the intelligence of your decisions, the peace of your interactions, the love behind every encounter. The stillness becomes your resting place, even in movement. In this quiet moment, you may gently acknowledge a simple truth, not as a statement to convince yourself, but as a reminder. Thy presence is here. Or, if you prefer, I rest in God. Say it once, inwardly, without emphasis, then let it go. Do not repeat it. Do not turn it over in your mind. Simply rest. There is no need to hold the truth, for the truth holds you. This is the life of realization. This is the life of be still and know, and it is available in each moment, not through effort, but through remembrance. And now, As we bring this period of study to a close, let us return once more to the simplicity of the silence from which we began. For everything that has been spoken is but a finger pointing toward an inner experience that cannot be conveyed in words. The truth we seek is not carried in sentences, nor held in the mind through memory. It is felt in the quiet awareness that rises when the mind is still and the heart is open. So let us pause for a moment, without intention, without effort, without the desire to achieve anything, and simply rest. The presence we have spoken of is not something we must reach for. It is here. It has been here before the first word was spoken, and it remains now as the life of our being. If we listen not with the ears, but with the soul, we feel that the silence is not empty. It is full. It is alive. It is the very substance of God expressing itself. We need not strain to enter this awareness. We need not hold tightly to any truth. We simply acknowledge with a light touch that the same presence which revealed itself to the prophets, the mystics, and the saints is the presence that animates us in this moment. We let this realization settle in our consciousness naturally, without expectation. And as we rest, the peace that surpasses human understanding begins to flow, not because we have called it, but because peace is the nature of God and God is here. And the knowing that I am God, that the divine I is the life of all, becomes the quiet foundation upon which you walk. We do not end this work when the words cease. Silence is the real teaching. The presence is the real teacher. And the knowing of God unfolds not through continued effort, but through continued receptivity. So let us leave in quiet gratitude, not gratitude for something gained, but gratitude for the eternal truth that has been revealed, that God is the life of our being, and that in the stillness we know.